the theme today is really to talk about money. How do you get it? How do you make it? When should you leverage debt? Does it make sense to take on equity? And this is an AMA, Ask Me Anything. So I'm going to introduce the concept with a really, really short overview. And then it's really meant to be an open dialogue where you guys are welcome to ask me anything and everything on the topic of sort of debt and equity and money and capital for your small business. So I'm just going to start by sharing this one slide. And this is sort of a philosophy that we increasingly are advocating for at Silver Lining. We're calling it the new small business capital stack. But what we really mean by that is trying to think about how small business owners could and should think differently about access to capital. There's so many conversations around access to capital happening right now in the world, which is a good thing. But what we're seeing is that a lot of small business owners are actually making very bad decisions about taking on debt that's too much or at bad terms, looking for investment when their business really is not structured for equity investment. And what we're trying to do is open up conversations around, well, what does good capital look like as a small business owner? So this is the philosophy, and this is what we'll dive into and just open up the floor for. But the prevailing point of view is that as a small business owner, revenue is your most critical form of capital. One of the very, very disturbing themes and trends we've seen since COVID actually is that we see that small business owners globally are focusing less on revenue and they're doing much more focus on trying to apply for grants, or they're trying to raise crowdsource money, or they're trying to go get a loan or raise investors. And all that time and all that energy is being spent on alternative revenue, basically. If they spent on actually just doing action campaigns and action items, they might be able to just generate revenue. So the big, big, big focus of SLAP, of course, is to make sure that there's an adequate amount of focus on looking at not just generating top line revenue, but profitable and sustainable revenue. And one of the absolute most fundamental things that I believe to be true is that profitable, sustainable revenue is the most powerful form of capital. And it keeps you, the business owner, in control of your business. We've used, and I'm happy to share some of these stories, but we've been, $500,000 in debt, almost bankrupt multiple times, 3 times to be exact. And the way that I got us out of it every single time was revenue, always, always revenue, because negotiating for debt or equity when you're in that level of crisis just means you're going to end up taking on bad deals. And bad deals never solve the problem, they delay the problem. So bad deals are very alluring because they release some short-term pain and cash flow, but they never solve the problem. They simply delay the problem. Now, sometimes we need a loan. You guys know we launched SLAP loans because we believe that getting a loan is helpful. Debt is a good thing. Debt is not a bad thing, but it's got to be fair and only if needed. One of the things that we see happening a lot is that small business owners take on debt because they're in crisis. So that's not when it's needed. Good debt is needed to fund an opportunity that has long-term return, or good debt is needed to make an investment in the growth of a business, right? But if the debt is being taken on to solve a crisis, then that debt is delaying the problem, not solving the problem. And often it's increasing the problem because now on top of whatever crisis it's delaying out, you've got interest accruing debt on top of it. So debt is very, very helpful. I really believe in debt, but it's got to be fair. And we can talk about that. And really, there are specific instances where bringing on debt is needed. And there's a lot of instances where it's really risky. Then, of course, investment. So everyone is very allured by the idea of getting an investor. Everyone wants to find a venture capitalist or get an investment, and they don't know why it's so hard to get investment. As I explain over and over and over again, equity investment, venture capital specifically, is a financial product, right? It's a type of capital that's been around, I mean, forever, as long as sort of we've all probably been around thinking about business. It became very common in popular culture language around the time that tech entrepreneurship became popular. And so everyone now just thinks they should get a VC. Everyone thinks they should get equity investment. And the reality is, before it was popular and today, there's been no change. Equity investment usually is only a viable form of investment or capital, I should say, in about 0.1% of businesses globally. It's not meant to be a commonly used financial vehicle. And so the purpose of a venture capital investment is that you bring in a large amount of money, right, in a big injection, and then you deploy that capital quickly, you scale fast, and you exit. So when you take on venture capital, they're expecting you to take it and to exit. For the average small business owner, that's not the game that we're playing. That's not the right intent of the business. And I very much believe that from an economic point of view, both personal economy and global economy, organic growth is a much more sustainable, practical, and helpful form of growth than scaled growth. But venture capital is looking for what I'm going to call almost false scaled growth in exchange for a short-term return on an investment. And that's just not the game that small business owners are playing. And so it's not, venture capitalists get a lot of bad reputational, feedback. They're not bad. They're just doing what they're meant to do, which is not the right thing for 99.9% of us. And so when we match the wrong financial vehicle to the wrong scenario, right, it's not going to work. So investment, I think, maybe can be an option for a small business owner, but it would have to be done entirely differently. We're actually working on a new slap capital product that we're hoping to launch fairly soon, actually, with the goal of playing with an alternative form of investment. And again, it's not going to be an investment because there'll be no equity exchange. But investment, the way that we all think about it, have to be done very differently for it to make sense for the average small business owner. And then last, but certainly not least, like I've already mentioned, is that there's this massive, massive over-reliance on grants. As you see here, we say that grants are good as rewards and grants are good for crisis management, right? When COVID hit and everyone's businesses shut down, it was incredibly appropriate that governments globally issued out grants to keep jobs, to keep businesses open, to help people pay their bills. That was an appropriate use of grant money. And then rewards, right? Even at Silver Lining, we give away grants, or the thank you prizes, we call them, through our Thank You Small Business movement, which are cash prizes, to reward an amazing human or to reward a cool thing. That's a good use of grants or prize money or, free money, for lack of a better word. But the reality is that they are not driving true profitability and true economic exchange. And so they end up, honestly, oftentimes, even for nonprofit organizations that rely on them, they end up creating business models that are not sustainable. And so what you see in a lot of nonprofit organizations, right, is that you've got a development director or an executive director that's just constantly having to raise money. There's no ability to turn it into a viable, sustainable organization without some level of earned income. So when we look at what small business owners are doing and what we're here to talk about, and I'm going to be quiet and we're going to talk, is we're seeing a massive over-reliance on grants, as if grants, right, are going to be a solution instead of income. We're seeing small businesses obsessed with getting equity investments and venture capital when it honestly makes absolutely no sense for any small business I've ever met to go get venture capital. We're seeing a lot of small businesses take on debt with terms that are not viable, delaying and amplifying crisis as opposed to solving crisis or cash flow. And we're ironically seeing a lot of small businesses not focusing on driving profitable, sustainable revenue. So if I could, wave my magic silver wand, right, every small business that feels like they're suffering with a cash flow crisis or feels like they're suffering with, a lack of financial abundance, which, by the way, is basically every small business in the world right now. It's a very complex economic reality right now. The instinct, I want to see the instinct shift from thinking if I could just get a loan, if I could just get an investor, if I could just get a grant, I'd be okay, to saying if I could just get a deal, if I could just sell something, then I'd be okay. So that's the big picture of sort of what we want to share as it relates to the small business capital stack.